and raped dozens of female victims.
Prosecutors say 3 wealthy brothers used their power and money to rape dozens of women, including a woman who says the brothers forced her into an SUV, took her to a remote mansion where security helped keep her imprisoned. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but multiple civil lawsuits filed against the brothers are coming back into the headlines as they currently face federal criminal charges. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, we first told you about Oren Alon and Tal Alexander last week. The twins and their older brother are accused by federal and state authorities of abusing women that they lured in using money, power, and also the promise of a relationship. They have reportedly made millions of dollars over the years in the Manhattan and Miami real estate markets, as well as a family-owned private security firm. They are very well known in both the New York and Florida scenes. But authorities say that it appears that these men, all in their late 30s, have been brutalizing women since they were in high school. On Friday, the twins, Oren and Alon, appeared in a Miami-Dade County courtroom and entered pleas of not guilty to state charges that they faced. They were able to secure multi-million-dollar bonds secured by their father's Florida estate, and they were supposed to be on house arrest with GPS monitoring, but the thing about that is they're not actually allowed to be released because they're also under federal indictment, along with their older brother Tal. So their attorneys appeared in Florida State Court again today as well.
You've already arraigned them both. My understanding today is really just for the parties to settle the last details on the $5 million surety bond. And I know that you were going to give a copy of that to the state so that they could review it first.
Yes, Judge. We tried on Friday. We went to the corrections with the orders, and the orders never made it to where they were supposed to make it to. So we have to start anew, and we have to prepare mortgages on each if we haven't done that. So we would ask for a reset until Thursday of this week.
That's fine.
So the judge kind of warned the attorneys that they may want to wait to settle the bond arrangements until after they find out whether the brothers will be granted bond in their federal case. We learned horrific details on the federal level about the suspects' alleged conduct from Damian Williams, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, when he announced their federal charges.
As alleged in the indictment, for years the Alexander brothers, sometimes with others, also arranged domestic and international trips to carry out their sex trafficking scheme. To recruit and induce women to come on the trips, they provided material benefits, things like travel to vacation destinations, luxury accommodations, and access to other high-end experiences. As alleged, the Alexander brothers met their trafficking victims through a variety of means: in person, over social media, on dating apps, and through social connections. At times, they allegedly used their social connections or the guise of starting a relationship to lure women into their orbit.
By the way, when you're hearing stories like this on Sidebar, do you ever ask yourself, how can I protect myself from what is going on in this world? Or maybe, how about this? How can I protect myself from what is going on in this world? Or maybe, how about this? How can I protect my home? What place is more important than that? Well, I'll tell you what, I didn't even know this, but apparently home title fraud is rampant right now. Yeah, so I met with the people over at Home Title Lock, our amazing partner and sponsor. They freaked me out. This is an example of a fraudulent quitclaim deed. It got filled out with my information, a forged signature, fake notary seal. So not only can my property just get transferred behind my back, but the scammers, they go after the equity. They take out loans using your home as collateral. They do all this, they disappear, they leave you with a legal and financial nightmare. But that is where Home Title Lock comes in to give you peace of mind, especially with their triple lock protection. That gets you 24/7 monitoring, alerts of any changes, and restoration services at no out-of-pocket cost to you. So to protect your home, go to HometitleLock.com/sidebar. Use our promo code SIDEBAR to get a 30-day free trial of their triple lock protection and a free title history report to make sure you aren't already a victim. Okay, so let's be clear about what they're facing at the federal level. All brothers are facing one count of conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. Tal, the older brother, is also facing one count of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion on his own with respect to one victim. but he shares another sex trafficking count of force, fraud, or coercion with the twins. This is with respect to another alleged victim. Now, aside from the conspiracy count, which is a little bit more overarching and may include multiple victims, the federal indictment itself details assaults that allegedly happened to 2 victims with those specific sex trafficking charges. So we're talking about one incident in 2011 and another in 2016, both out in the Hamptons in New York. But they're also facing state charges in Florida. And the state charges are the result of at least 3 women claiming that one or more of the brothers sexually assaulted them in Miami Beach. One of those women even claims that the twins argued about who would get to rape her first. Now, as we have seen recently with the arrest of another wealthy man with ties to New York City and Miami, Sean P. Diddy Combs, sex trafficking charges from the federal government, they can sometimes come after high-profile lawsuits are filed in civil court. When these alleged victims come forward, that is sometimes when you see the criminal charges. And arguably, that is what happened here, because the Alexander brothers, they have not escaped litigation. Some of these lawsuits came out first. And that is what we're going to talk about right now, because we've got our hands on 5 civil complaints that were filed in both federal and state court. And 4 of the 5 plaintiffs have chosen to identify themselves, but there is one who is proceeding as a Jane Doe. Now, some of the women's stories, they actually match up with what victims have told investigators anonymously in the criminal cases. So it does make you wonder if these alleged victims, these accusers, are actually cooperating witnesses with prosecutors in those cases. So I want to quickly go through the lawsuits. We'll break them down. And to be clear, we are not going to get into the most graphic parts of these women's alleged recollections, but these complaints could obviously have an impact on those criminal cases, especially if prosecutors are able to establish a pattern of behavior by the brothers. So let's start this off with Kate Whiteman. According to what we found on the New York Supreme Court website, 2 women filed complaints on March 8, 2024. One named Alon and Oren, the twins, while the other named the twins and a third man, mysteriously known as Sir Ivan. Now, Sir Ivan is apparently Ivan Wilzig, this reported banker, oil CEO turned music creator. I'm going to talk about this for a little bit and talk about what we know about Wilzig. So his father was reportedly a survivor of the Holocaust who came to the United States. His mother later went on to found the Wilzig Erotic Art Museum in Florida after Wilzig reportedly asked his mom to help him curate some erotic art pieces for a new apartment. This is all, by the way, according to the museum's art website. Ivan Wilzig at first was in the executive suites of his father's companies. This is according to an article in Headliner magazine. But the article says that he later hooked up with a producer and started creating electronic dance music. He's kind of a unique guy to be wrapped up in all of this, to say the least. Well, according to a complaint filed by Kate Whiteman, Wilzig had this large home in a remote part of the Hamptons in New York. And she claims that she was taken there, and when she was taken there, she was battered and she was raped. Now, Whiteman, who now lives in Australia, filed her lawsuit against Alon, Oren, and Wilzig in New York State Court. She says back in 2008, she met Alon and Oren and would frequently see the twins out and about in New York City. But according to her complaint, Oren had asked her out on multiple occasions, but she always declined. Then you fast forward to 2012, because she and her friends were leaving a club in the Hamptons. And this is when she says Alon recognized her, grabbed her hand, and pulled her toward a black SUV and forced her inside, where Oren was allegedly waiting. The complaint states plaintiff repeatedly asked the twins where they were going, but they refused to answer and instead smirked at one another. After driving for quite some time, the SUV turned off the road, drove up a long driveway in a remote area. Plaintiff later found out she had been taken to Sir Ivan's castle. Once plaintiff and the twins were inside the garage door, the door closed and locked immediately right behind them. Plaintiff was then told that she must change into a sarong. Plaintiff then proceeded to make a dash for the stairs that led up to the house while fully dressed. As plaintiff bolted for the stairs, there was a security bouncer who grabbed her arm and dragged her back into the garage. At all times relevant herein, this bouncer was an agent, employee, and/or servant of defendant Sir Ivan. Plaintiff was ultimately forced to strip and change into a sarong. Her phone and other belongings were placed into a locker that was immediately locked by Oren, who then put the key around his wrist. The twins then led plaintiff upstairs to what appeared to be a large bedroom. And I have to say, one of the things that is so scary about this alleged account is what a sophisticated operation it sounded like, right? Going into the garage, the door locks behind them, there's security there to keep her from running away, and then a locker right there waiting for them to put her stuff into. It's pretty terrifying, to say the least. And Whiteman says that is when both brothers raped her. While she doesn't accuse Wilzig of attacking her, she does claim that defendant Sir Ivan and or his agents, servants, and or employees wrongfully allowed, facilitated, and condoned such conduct. So that is how she's trying to hold him liable as well. Now, Whiteman's attorneys list 6 causes of action in this lawsuit: sexual assault and battery, violation of New York's gender-motivated violence protection law, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, and negligent infliction of emotional distress. Now, the other woman to file on March 8th is Rebecca Mandel. She's actually represented by the same law firm as Whiteman. Mandel says that she met Alon and Orrin, the 2 defendants named in this lawsuit, back in 2009 in New York City. And the following year, she apparently bumps into them at a nightclub. She says Alon insisted on buying her a drink and then came back several minutes later with a cocktail. Now, she says after that is when her memory starts getting a bit hazy. Mandel says the twins convinced her to go to a party that they were throwing back at their apartment. When they got there, she realized no one else was there and that she had been tricked. This is according to the complaint. Mandel says she was repeatedly held down and raped by both Orrin and Alon, allegedly taking turns doing this. She is suing under 3 causes of action: assault and battery, violation of New York's gender-motivated violence protection law, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Angelica Parker, let's turn to her, because in June of this year, Angelica Parker sued all 3 brothers in New York State court after she alleged that she was assaulted at an apartment in Manhattan. So in her complaint, she says that when she went to the apartment with her friend, identified only as YL, she thought only the twins would be there, but later found out that their older brother Tal was there as well. YL reportedly became uncomfortable with the way that Alon was groping her, so she leaves the apartment. And the complaint reads, however, she was so concerned for Miss Parker's safety that she stayed in the apartment building in a stairwell. After YL left the apartment, Miss Parker was raped by Alon and Tal Alexander together in a coordinated sexual assault that was planned and facilitated by Orrin Alexander along with his brothers. And Parker claims that Orrin just sat in a chair and watched. Now, her friend was still allegedly outside the apartment when Parker left, and then she immediately told her what had happened. And I have to say, in what is a very sick twist, Parker says she still saw the brothers at events around the city. During this time, the Alexander brothers made various defamatory statements about Miss Parker, gratuitously telling her friends that they had sex with her, without, of course, explaining that the whole event was an orchestrated group rape. And she even claims that years later, Tal burst into her guest room at a home where he was also staying before he was eventually kicked out. And Parker is filing under 1 cause of action, violation of the Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Act. I'm going to explain that also in a little bit, but now I want to go to another accuser, Renee Willett. So a little more than a month after Parker's action was filed in state court, Renee Willett filed a lawsuit against Orrin in New York federal court. And her complaint says that after she had heard that other women had come forward with allegations, she realized she wasn't the only person to be victimized, and that her story could potentially help hold these men accountable. Again, very, very similar to the flurry of lawsuits that we saw in the Sean Combs case. Once there was 1 lawsuit, a 2nd lawsuit, a 3rd lawsuit, you saw more and more lawsuits, more and more people coming forward. Again, these are all allegations, but it could give you a sense of why these stories are coming out now. So, it appears, then we go back to Renee Willett, that she is filing her lawsuit federally because she is a resident of New York and Orrin is a resident and domiciled in Florida. You can get into federal court when it's a dispute between citizens of different states and the amount at issue in the lawsuit exceeds $75,000. Okay, so Willett says that she added Orrin as a friend in a private dating and networking app because they had some mutual friends in common. Now, after talking for a few weeks, she says she agreed to meet up with Orrin on the night of December 15th, 2015, after she hung out with her friends for her birthday. And she was supposed to meet him at this hotel bar, but when she got there, the bar was closed. So she agreed to meet Orrin at his apartment, which was nearby. She says Orrin offered her a cocktail, but she asked for just water instead. And when he brought her something carbonated, she didn't really want to correct him, so she drank it, but now she believes that she was drugged. According to the complaint, defendant proceeded to give Renee a tour of his apartment to purportedly show her his art collection. After viewing the art in the living room, defendant then led Renee to a room near the main entrance of the apartment. This room turned out to be defendant's bedroom. Willett says that she felt uncomfortable, so she tried to leave the room, but Oren blocked her path. And she claims that Oren tried to pull her shirt down, but what ended up happening was she falls backwards onto the bed. And that is when she says Oren raped her. And she too is suing for violation of New York's gender-motivated violence protection law. By the way, let me dig into this a little bit. So here is a description of why that statute is being used in this case and also the other cases. So it says here, defendant assaulted and raped Renee without her consent in order to satisfy his penchant for sexual violence. Defendant exhibited anger and animus towards Renee. So it's the idea that he allegedly did this to her because she is a woman and he has this animus towards women, that the sexual assault is allegedly evidence of that animus. So now you see why that statute is being used. We want to end this now with Jane Doe, okay, this unidentified accuser, this fifth accuser, and possibly, arguably, maybe the most horrific of the civil complaints that we found. And that is not easy to say, considering what the allegations have been up to this point, but I'll lay out why. So this case was filed on behalf of Jane Doe in New York State Court just last week, naming the twins. And by the way, I have to quickly say, based on what we're seeing in the Sean Combs cases, where you have a number of Jane Does who are trying to proceed anonymously, a lot of them are losing that. A lot of the times the court is saying they have to identify themselves, that it's only fair the defendants have a right to investigate and challenge these accusers, that this is a civil case that they brought, and we'll see if that's the case actually when it comes to the Alexander brothers. But going back to this Jane Doe. So she lived in New York, but had traveled to Florida, where she says that is where she was assaulted. And we believe this is actually the same incident that led to criminal charges being filed in Miami against the twins, because it matches up with what the state's attorney there said about the charges when they were announced. So Jane Doe says that she met Alon on this dating app called Bumble in 2016, and they had this brief, casual relationship, and she says she met up with Alon at his apartment in New York two times. Then, in December, Jane Doe says she was visiting her family in Central Florida for the holidays, and then from there is when she traveled with her sister and friends to Miami to celebrate the New Year. But this is what the complaint says. Upon information and belief, Alon utilized location identifying measures and social media to discover that plaintiff was in Miami. Around mid-afternoon on December 31st, 2016, on New Year's Eve, Alon and plaintiff began communicating via electronic messaging. Plaintiff learned through her text conversation with Alon that he was also in Miami. So the plaintiff says that Alon invited her to this barbecue and pool party allegedly happening at a luxury building in Miami Beach. And she says he even sent her a photo of people apparently enjoying themselves at a pool to try to get her to come there. So Jane Doe says she ended up taking an Uber to the building, where Alon had introduced her to his brother Oren and a man named Ohad Fisherman, who Alon had said was their cousin. Now this is interesting because an attorney for Ohad, who's been named, by the way, in connection with the Miami criminal charges that resulted from Jane Doe's allegations, or seem to, has said that his client is actually not a cousin to the Alexander brothers, but now you can see why there was this belief by prosecutors that he was. Anyway, coming back to this. She claims that Alon led her to a building, and Oren and Ohad were following behind and locked the door. And she says these twins argued about who would be allowed to rape her first. And Oren allegedly won that fight. She says Ohad held her down by the shoulders while Oren raped her, not letting up until she stopped struggling. Now, Jane Doe's complaint says, while being raped, plaintiff instinctively started pretending to enjoy the rape, as she had previously heard a rapist may stop if the victim acts like they're enjoying the rape. It worked. Shortly thereafter, Oren stopped and angrily exclaimed, "F this," as he threw his condom on the ground and stormed out of the bedroom. And then, Jane Doe says, Alon raped her next and then ordered her to perform sex acts on Ohad. She claims she was unable to do so because she was just crying uncontrollably so hard. She claims from there, Alon forced her to shower and even joined her in the shower, all while Ohad allegedly stayed watching. And then she was sent on her way home in an Uber. The complaint reads, defendant's demeanor throughout this orchestrated assault was composed as if it was just a normal routine in the course of their day, with complete and utter disregard for the lifetime of trauma, shame, emotional turmoil they imposed on the plaintiff. It goes on to say the defendants do not regard women as human, but rather objects to fulfill their deranged, violent desires. Defendants, who were wealthy and arguably good-looking, could have engaged in all of the consensual sex they desired, but that is not what they sought. It was the brutal and violent assault and rape of women. And she is also suing for violation of New York's gender-motivated violence protection law. So what happens next? Well, there was this hearing to finalize bond on the state charges for Alon and Oren, and has been reset for Thursday, but for now, the brothers are behind bars at 2 separate jails, according to inmate records. Their alleged accomplice in at least one of these attacks, Ohad Fisherman, is expected in court on Wednesday. And Tal Alexander, who's only charged in federal court and not in Miami, was denied bond by a federal judge and is locked up at the Federal Detention Center out in Miami. So that gives us an idea of perhaps the brothers, Oren and Alon, will not make bond at the federal level as well. But no word yet on when Oren and Alon will face a federal judge. But during his first court appearance after his arrest, Oren interrupted the judge in state court to tell her why he couldn't be in jail.
Your Honor, my wife is 9 months pregnant, due any day now with our first child. Her family's in Brazil. She's counting on me to be with her during labor.
And because it's considered a dangerous crime, I'm required to hold you with no bond.
There's also a federal hold judge.
He does, Your Honor. He has a hold for the FBI.
And Oren's wife, Camilla Hansen, is apparently from Brazil. She has also reportedly deleted her Instagram account since this arrest. And we will continue to follow this story and bring you updates as they come in. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube.